Hey, my beautiful beans. I was wondering, you ever notice how every southern house worth its salt has a fence? Not a wall, a fence. Something that says, "This is mine to tend. You're welcome to visit, but please close the gate behind you." Boundaries are like that fence. It's not about keeping people out. It's about keeping your peace in. You've probably felt guilty for saying no, and you're not alone in that. I used to repaint that emotional fence every weekend and then apologize when someone leaned on it too hard. So, today we're going to talk about boundaries, what they really are, why they're so hard, and how to build them without guilt or barbed wire. Welcome to Human Beings Radio, a little garden for the mind, body, and spirit. Some days you bloom, some days you just hold the soil together. Either way, you're still growing. My granddaddy used to say, "Good fences make good neighbors, but only if the gate swings both ways." At the time, I thought he meant literal fences. Now I know he was teaching emotional geometry, how to mark where you end and someone else begins. For most of my life, I didn't have much of a fence. If someone needed me, I showed up. If they were angry, I smoothed it over. If they disapproved, I shrank. That's what psychologists call fawning, the trauma response that trades self-respect for safety. It feels generous, but it's really exhaustion dressed as kindness. Here's the science. The nervous system has two main safety modes. One says fight or flee. The other says tend and befriend. When you've been taught that love depends on pleasing, that befriend mode gets stuck wide open. You become a 24-hour empathy hotline, and honey, even the best hotlines have business hours. I used to think boundaries were selfish, but the truth is, they're how love survives the long haul. Because when we give without edges, resentment sneaks in through the cracks. And resentment is a slow poison. It turns, "Of course I'll help," into, "Why do they always ask me?" Boundaries are how we love people on purpose instead of by accident. The first time I really tried to set one, I was shaking. A friend wanted me to watch her kids, again, on my only day off. And I said, "I can't today." She sighed and said the words, "You used to be so reliable." That arrow hit dead center in my people-pleaser heart. Every cell screamed, "Fix it!" But instead, I breathed. I let that silence hang there, and I repeated, "I can't today." That night, I realized something. I didn't die. The friendship didn't either. That's how boundaries teach your body safety, through repetition, not explanation. Now, I have some explanation. Neuroscience calls that process extinction learning. Each time you say no and the sky doesn't fall, your amygdala, that fear center, it rewrites its script. You're literally proving to your brain that rejection won't kill you. That's emotional strength training. I want to do a little thing here. Let's take a breath together. And in that breath, I want you to ask yourself gently, where in my life am I saying yes while my body says no? No judgment, just curiosity. Ask yourself, take a deep breath, hold it, and there you go. That place, that's where your next fence post goes. Now, let's go over the types of boundaries. There are some clear definitions of what they are. It's just a simple map I can offer you. There's basically 5 main kinds of boundaries. Most of us only think of one, but these 5 can work together and really, really teach you how to set those boundaries for yourself. The first kind is physical boundaries. Your space, your comfort, your need for quiet or rest or privacy. whether or not you feel like being touched. Next are emotional boundaries. You are responsible for your feelings, and others are responsible for theirs, and never the twain shall meet. There are also time boundaries. Your minutes and your hours belong to you. No, I'm not available then is a completely valid answer. There are energetic boundaries, protecting that mental bandwidth that we have, not committing to what drains you. And then there are boundaries we set for ourselves, digital boundaries. When you answer, what you engage with, what you tolerate online. Healthy adults use all 5 of these. Most of us grew up maybe using one on Tuesdays when the moon was full. Because as we all know, guilt loves to tag along. It whispers, "You're letting people down." But guilt isn't always truth. Sometimes it's just a signal that you're breaking an old rule. Rules like, good daughters never disappoint, or real friends are always available. Those aren't virtues. They're survival codes written by fear. You can thank them for getting you here and then kindly retire them. I learned, of course, that lesson the hard way with my cousin, who I'm very close to. He'd call it midnight, upset about a breakup, wanting to rehash every detail. At first, I'd stay on the line until past 2 a.m. and be bleary-eyed at work the next day. Eventually, I said, "Honey, I love you, but I can't do 2 a.m. anymore. Call me tomorrow and we'll talk through it." He huffed a little and he hung up, but the next day he called at noon. Boundary held. Love intact. That's what I mean by a fence with a gate. You can have firm set posts and still have that open gate of a heart. People think boundaries end relationships. They actually reveal which ones can handle honesty. The folks meant for you adjust their path to meet the gate instead of kicking it down. In therapy language, a boundary is a limit that honors both parties. In body language, it's a cue of safety. It says, "I trust you enough to be clear." When we overgive, our nervous system reads danger because we're violating ourselves to keep peace. When we set limits, our body exhales. That exhale is biology's way of saying, "I belong to myself again." One trick I use before I say yes is I check for a physical cue. If my shoulders tense up, that's a maybe no. If my chest opens up, that's a real yes. Your body knows before your mouth does. That's somatic mindfulness. It's a wisdom that's under every good boundary. Now, I want to name the 3 biggest things that sabotage boundaries. The first one of these culprits is over-explaining. If the word "because" keeps popping up, your boundary is leaking energy. Remember, just stop the sentence at the period. It is a complete thought. The next culprit is apologizing for your own needs. You don't owe an apology to anyone, not for being human. The only thing you owe an apology for is for doing harm, and it does no one any harm for you to protect yourself. You need to replace that knee-jerk sorry with "thank you for understanding." Now, the third culprit, this one I've been very guilty of in my life, and that's making someone else's reaction your responsibility. Their disappointment is not your command. Their emotions exist outside of your fence, and you need to let them. Knowing how to react to these sabotages, this shift can change everything. So, if you're listening right now and thinking, "Well, I wish I could say no without the guilt," start small. Say no to the thing that steals your peace first, not your paycheck. You don't need a speech. You need a sentence. That won't work for me. Full stop. Your worth isn't measured in explanations. Boundaries aren't walls. They're invitations to meet each other in truth. They let love breathe by giving it shape. And when you learn to tend your own yard, you don't just protect your peace. You give others permission to grow fences of their own. So, at this point, before we go deeper, I want to pause and name something really important. If boundaries feel scary, heavy, or even wrong, there are reasons for that, and none of them are moral failures. Some families teach that love is measured in self-sacrifice. Some cultures teach that saying no is disrespect. Some churches teach that obedience is holy. And some of us grew up in homes where saying no just wasn't frowned on. It was unsafe. So if your hands shake, or your voice wavers, or you feel guilty for hours afterward, that's conditioning, not character. Your body is protecting you using old survival maps drawn long before you had a choice. A boundary is just a small, brave update. And that update reads, "The danger is gone. I get to choose now." That shift alone can add 10 years back to your life.
You're listening to Human Beings Radio, a little garden for the mind, body, and spirit. If something in today's episode is planting a seed, share it with a friend, or water it a little by visiting humanbeingsradio.com. You'll find show notes, community links, and ways to help this project keep growing. We'll be right back with part 2 in just a sec.
All right, let's get back into boundaries. When people say boundaries are hard, what they really mean is nervous system work is hard. Every no you give sends a shockwave through circuits that once equated pleasing with safety. That's because the vagus nerve, that one that keeps our heart and gut in rhythm, links directly to social engagement. When we sense disapproval, that nerve constricts, and our heart rate jumps right up. So we rush to fix, to apologize, to smooth it over. As I'm fond of saying, that's not weakness, that's wiring. For myself, I call it the good girl reflex, or the be nice reflex. Whatever name you give it, it's a leftover survival skill from when belonging equaled survival. But adulthood asks for a new kind of belonging, the kind built on truth, not appeasement. Psychologists, they're going to call this self-differentiation, being connected without collapsing. It's what lets you say, "I love you, and that doesn't work for me." Love and limit in the same breath. That's emotional maturity, not coldness. Here's the biology of that. Every time you hold that boundary and breathe through the guilt, the brain's insula lights up, that part that's responsible for internal awareness. You're literally teaching your body what calm assertion feels like. Over time, guilt fades and peace takes its place. That's neuroplastic grace. When I first started this practice, I had to keep a sticky note on my mirror that said, "No" is a full sentence. Some mornings I'd whisper it like a prayer. Old habits, they can die noisy. But each time I chose a truthful no instead of a resentful yes, life got quieter inside. Let's get practical with that for a moment. Here are a few boundary phrases that work in real life without burning bridges. There are soft, kind boundaries. "That won't work for me today." "I'd love to help, but I don't have the capacity this week." Let me think about that and get back to you." There are really firm boundaries, like, I'm not available for that. Please don't speak to me that way. Or, I won't be continuing this conversation. Now, some of the hardest kinds of boundaries are family boundaries. But sometimes you have to look at them and say, I'm stepping back from that topic. I love you, but I'm not discussing this anymore. You're important to me, and this tone doesn't feel respectful. And sometimes we have to have an emergency boundary, something that comes up at us out of nowhere that we really have to deal with for our own peace. And those sound a lot like, I'm ending this conversation now. We're not a good match for this discussion. Or simply, goodbye, said with peace, not invitation. Having these phrases in your arsenal, well, it can be invaluable. If you need to remind yourself of them, embroider them on a pillow, tattoo them on your forearm for holiday dinners, stick them on sticky notes all over your car, your house, and your work. Because boundaries aren't just between people. They're also between parts of you. There is an exhausted part of you that says yes to avoid conflict. And then there's a wiser part of you that whispers, please rest. Mindfulness helps you hear the whisper before the shout. If you've ever said yes while your stomach screamed no, congratulations. You've met your inner alarm system. That twist in your gut is your body's version of a smoke detector. You can ignore it for a while, but eventually something's going to catch fire. So here's a trick from therapy that I love. Pause, feel, choose. The way this goes is before you answer a request, you pause, take one breath. You feel what's happening in your body. Then you choose from intention, not impulse. It sounds simple, but it rewires everything. I once had a boss, and I won't call him any names, who'd drop work on my desk at 4:55 p.m. The old me would stay late, smile tight, and then cry in the car because I was behind on every domestic duty that I wanted to complete that day. One day I looked up and I smiled softer and I said, I can start this first thing in the morning. He blinked, nodded, and walked away. And then I realized that's all it took. Clarity, not confrontation. Most people will adjust when you stop teaching them that you will overextend. Boundaries and compassion, they aren't opposites, they're partners. Compassion says, I care about you. And boundaries say, I also care about me. And together, they are the most honest love. Recovery taught me this. Serenity isn't about getting what you want. It's about learning what's yours to carry. When you set a boundary, you're laying down what was never yours. Other people's moods, their mistakes, their expectations, those don't belong to you. That release is freedom with both feet on the ground. So, if you're practicing saying no this week, and I hope you are, remember, your worth was never measured in how much you absorb. Let guilt be a passing guest, not a permanent tenant. You're going to breathe through it. It's just an old alarm ringing in a house that you've already made safe. You can love people fiercely and still lock your gate at night. That's not cruelty, it's stewardship. Now, just a little reminder about how boundaries shift depending on the relationship. So, with your parents, you're allowed to be an adult, even if they forget. With partners, boundaries are not threats, they're clarity. With friends, Good friends adjust, acquaintances drift. Both outcomes are peace. With adult children, your job is presence, not self-erasure. And with coworkers, clarity is professionalism, not rudeness. And just remember, my beautiful, beautiful bean, every relationship gets stronger when everyone knows the edges.
This is Human Beings Radio, stories of growth, grace, and starting over. If these conversations help you steady your roots, pass it along. You can support the garden at buymeacoffee.com/humanbeangsradio, or simply leave a kind comment. Every share, every listen helps light reach a little farther. Now, stay rooted, because our next segment is Everything I Need to Know I Learned from PBS.
Today on Everything I Need to Know I Learned from PBS, I'm going to reference that good old standby Sesame Street. It taught us so much. This is kind of a composite memory of different sketches that I just remember vividly. When I think about boundaries, I think about Sesame Street. It wasn't therapy, but it taught half a generation how to be human, probably more than half my generation, honestly. Big Bird was the first friend who showed us that saying no doesn't make you mean. It just means you know what's right for you. There was an episode where he didn't want to share his birdseed milkshakes. He felt bad at first, but then he learned over the course of the show that you can care about friends and still keep what you need to stay healthy and happy. That was boundary work in feathers and sneakers. And I know everyone probably remembers this one, there was Grover, bless him, and he was running back and forth yelling, near, and then stump, 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 far, until we got it. It turns out that sketch is actually the perfect metaphor for boundaries, too. Grover wasn't rejecting us. He was showing distance with clarity and joy. Sometimes you need near, and sometimes you need far. Healthy love moves between both without fear. Watching those moments as a kid, I didn't realize I was absorbing emotional geometry. That kindness has shape, that friendship has space, and that you can be close without being consumed. When my boys were little and I caught an old episode with them, it hit me. All those lessons were still true for grown-ups. Big Bird's gentle, no, thank you, and Grover's gleeful, far. They remind me that boundaries don't have to be walls. They can be playful, honest signals of comfort. So thank you, Sesame Street, for teaching us that love can be bright and yellow and a little awkward, that saying no can sound kind, and that friendship is strongest when everyone knows where near ends and far begins. I'm a very introspective person, and when I think about these topics, I always go back to those most formative years of my spirit, the times where I didn't even know I was learning lessons, and then I look back at them, and in that hindsight I find something, a nugget that reminds me of exactly what it is I'm reaching for. So, a little story time today. I'm going to tell you a story about the back 40 on my granddaddy's land, and a boundary I set much later in life, long after he passed, when I finally figured out what he was trying to teach me. I grew up on this little patch of Tennessee red clay that had more cornfields in it than people. Granddaddy used to say, good land teaches you everything you need to know if you listen. I didn't have any idea what he meant. On the far edge of the property, though, was a fence line that technically separated our land from my Uncle Ray's land. Now, Uncle Ray was the kind of man who would borrow a tool and wear it out and return it only after you went looking for it. He wasn't mean or bad. He was just one of those folks who took up a lot more space than he realized. Every few years, that fence would sag or lean because he'd push through with his tractor instead of going around. And every time, me and Granddaddy would have to walk out there with posts and wire and fix what had been bent. One hot, really hot afternoon, must have been August, sweat stinging in my eyes. We're working like dogs. And I asked, why do we keep fixing a fence somebody else keeps breaking? And he just wiped his forehead and looked out over the fields and said, well, it's our fence. And sometimes people don't understand that there's a lot of work involved in fences. Sometimes you have to show them the shape of it twice. At the time, I rolled my eyes. I was a teenager. And boundaries, of course, back then weren't even a vocabulary word. But years later, long after Granddaddy was gone and the farm had passed hands, that lesson came back around to me in a way that I didn't expect. It happened with a family member that I dearly love, but who's always treated my time like it came out of her faucet instead of my well. Every crisis, every meltdown, every inconvenience, she'd call me first. Not because I was the best person to help, but because I'd taught her over the years of soft yeses that I would drop everything to fix her world. It was family, after all, and in the South, family is an entire emotional ecosystem. But it got to where every time her name lit up my phone, I felt my stomach clench. Not dread of her, dread of myself for bending again. One day, she called me, and I was dead on my feet. I had worked a double shift, had laundry in the washer, dinner half cooked, 2 kids asking for help on homework, and her voice came through the phone, just frantic. I need you to come over right now. I can't do this alone. Everything in me rose like a tide, and that old familiar instinct was, well, fix it, go on, hurry, shoulder it. But something in me that day, it could have been exhaustion or wisdom maybe finally catching up with me, whispered my granddaddy's words. Sometimes people don't understand the work that goes into a fence until you show them the shape of it twice. Well, I took a breath, and instead of sprinting into her crisis, I said, I love you. I'm sorry you're having a rough time. I can't come tonight. Silence. Long enough to hear my own heartbeat. And then, wow, so that's how it is? Now, old me would have panicked, backpedaled, offered an explanation long enough to qualify for continuing education credit. But this time I just stayed still. I can talk to you for a few minutes and try to talk you through it, but I can't come over. Well, she huffed and she sighed. She let the disappointment sit heavy enough to make me sweat. But I held that line. I want you to know, though, when we hung up, I cried. Not because she was harsh, but because I had finally done something new. Something that felt like learning to walk again, using muscles I didn't know I had. The next morning, she called me back, and her voice was calmer. And she said, I figured it out. I didn't like last night, but I realized I lean on you more than I should. And I swear to you, I felt something shift in my whole spirit, like one of those old wooden gates on the back 40 finally falling into its proper hinge. A fence was mended. Not a wall, a fence. One she could still lean on when she needed help, but not one she could push through with a tractor. In the weeks that followed, something else changed too. She began asking instead of assuming. She started checking in instead of dumping. And she respected space I didn't even know I had the right to claim. And here's what surprised me most. I loved her better once I wasn't loving her from depletion. Some relationships don't survive boundaries. That's just the truth. But the ones that are built on real connection, they get stronger and clearer and quieter. Just like the land does after you repair the parts that have been trampled on too long. My granddaddy was right. You'll hear me say that a lot. Good fences do make good neighbors, and even better kinfolk. And whether he borrowed it from Robert Frost or not, you gotta understand that it's only if you're willing to build those fences and then rebuild them. And sometimes, finally, just let them stand. So if you're listening to this and thinking of your own Uncle Ray, your own sagging fence line somewhere he keeps leaning on, your own complicated relationship where you always say yes, let me say this gently. You are allowed to repair what's yours. You are allowed to reinforce the posts. You are allowed to say, this is where my peace begins. And it's not because you're shutting people out. You're finally letting yourself in.
If what you've heard today feels like it met you where you are, take a breath and help it find the next person who might need it. That's how Human Beings Radio grows. Every time you share an episode, leave a kind review, or tell a friend, hey, listen to this. You help this little garden reach new listeners who could use a bit of comfort or company. Those small gestures add up to something real. You can find full episodes, transcripts, and behind-the-scenes updates at humanbeangsradio.com. And if you'd like to help keep the mics warm and the tea poured, you can visit buymeacoffee.com/humanbeangsradio to chip in or join the Bean Patch as a sustaining supporter. Every dollar goes right back into production and the creative work that keeps these conversations blooming. We also have a Human Beings Radio Facebook group, a gentle place to share thoughts, connect with others, and keep growing together in real time. Whether you stop by to listen, chat, or just read along quietly, you're a part of the community. Thanks for being here, for showing up, and for helping this project keep growing. Now, let's get back to the show.
And now, it's time for a bean break, where we plant a seed, water it, and watch it grow. Today's seed is permission. Permission. You are allowed to have limits. Boundaries are not rejection. They are the shape of care. Now let's water that seed. I want you to picture a garden fence in your mind. Not a wall, just a gentle frame that keeps the flowers safe. Now breathe in and say, my peace is sacred ground. And then as you breathe out, I can love without losing myself. That's your watering. Simple, steady, honest kindness for yourself. And here's the growth we can enjoy. Boundaries don't end connection. They make healthy connection possible. You keep tending the gate so that peace can take root. Here in Blue Book bindings, I lean on the Blue Book a lot. It may have been written for people recovering from drink, But what it really teaches is how to live in freedom and how to stop carrying what was never yours. Today it's brought to mind from the Blue Book the quote, "Before we are halfway through, we are going to know a new freedom and a new happiness." From my copy, that's from page 83. That line, every time I set a boundary, I think of that line. Because freedom doesn't just mean sobriety. It means living unentangled. It means letting the gate swing, knowing what stays in your yard and what belongs to the world beyond it. For so many years, I mistook people pleasing for love. And then recovery taught me that love without boundaries is chaos. Serenity does not grow in a trampled garden. It grows in the small, tended space where honesty and compassion share the same soul. Sometimes, when I feel that old guilt rise, the urge to apologize for existing, I whisper a line from the steps. We ceased fighting anyone or anything, even ourselves. And that's the heart of it. Boundaries aren't fights, they're ceasefires. Moments when you put down the weapons of over-explaining and let peace stand guard instead. When I tell someone no now, I picture a gate closing gently, not slamming. It doesn't lock, it just latches. I can still wave from the porch, still love them, still wish them well. But my peace stays inside the yard where it belongs. That's the new freedom that book promised. Not perfection, just clarity. Not control, just care. So, tonight, if you're weary from saying yes too often, remember, your serenity is sacred ground. Keep the gate oiled, keep the garden watered, and the welcome mat honest. Keep coming back. Keep tending the fence. And let peace do the rest. I'm going to pull a new segment here out. I've been wanting to add this to review or go over different bits of media that are out there, whether they're for entertainment or whether they back up the theme of the day. And there's something that y'all probably don't know about me, and that is I'm an absolute monster for research. I don't like to say things that aren't true, and I don't like to impart wisdom that isn't mine without giving credit. When I do any research on boundaries, I have a tendency to go back to the same 3 books. It's not because they're trendy, but because they're the kind that get taught, cited, and passed around in therapy offices like they're sacred texts. I want to share those with you today, not as a formal book report, but just a little conversation, neighbors leaning over a fence, swapping stories about what finally worked after a lifetime of trying everything else. In reference to what we're talking about today, I'd call the first book The Blueprint. It's called Boundaries by Drs. Cloud and Townsend, and there's a reason that this book has survived the fad cycles. It's not cute or fluffy. It is a structural manual for what a boundary is and what it isn't. Instead of reading you a definition, though, let me tell you the moment that this book snapped into focus for me. A while back, a family member of mine, one I love deeply, kept dropping by unannounced. And I'm a very private person, and they'd just walk right in and open the fridge and settle on my couch like it was some kind of rest stop on their emotional highway. And sometimes that's okay, and I did let it happen. You know, that's family, right? That's what we're taught. But one day, after a long week, I was having trouble. I'd been overwhelmed and overstimulated all day, and I was just sitting on my porch, reading quietly. And I was doing research, and Boundaries happened to be sitting there. And I hit that line where it says, a lack of boundaries invites a lack of respect. And it was like lightning hitting the page. Now that family member was not there that day, and it hadn't happened that day, but it immediately brought that situation to mind. I closed the book, walked inside, wrote a little sign, and I went and I put it on my door. And it said, please text before coming by. I wasn't trying to be aggressive or cold. I just wanted to be clear. And yes, the next time they came by without texting, I didn't answer the door. And that was the real boundary. Not the sign, but the follow-through. And they were confused and probably a little offended. But you know what? A couple weeks later, they knocked, waited, and said, I wasn't sure if you were busy, so I figured I'd check first. And respect started to grow in the space where guilt used to live. So Cloud and Townsend taught me that love doesn't disappear setting that limit, but resentment will grow if you let it. The next one of these books that I've gone back to often is probably the Real World Guide, where boundaries is the blueprint. This is like the putting it in practice. It's called Set Boundaries, Find Peace by Nedra Glover Tawwab. And if Cloud and Townsend do give you that blueprint, Tawwab absolutely gives you that toolkit. Real language, real scripts, real examples. One thing I absolutely adore about her work is that she validates the messy part of boundaries. Y'all might know I absolutely lean into those messy parts of life. And she doesn't just talk about the idea, but she talks about the tremble in your voice when you try it. There's a part in her book where she says, the first boundary is internal. It's the one you set with yourself. Hoot doggies. That one hit home. Hit me right where I live. Because the truth is, most of us don't struggle with telling other people no. We struggle with giving ourselves permission to use the word no. And Tawwab talks about boundary violations disguised as kindness. Like when someone texts you late at night with a quick question, and your whole body sinks because you know it won't be quick, but you answer anyway. Had a friend like that, always in crisis, always needing to talk real quick. And I played therapist because that made me feel useful. After reading Nedra's book, I realized I wasn't helping that person. I was enabling them to take advantage of me. So I practiced a script that she suggests, which is, I'm not available right now, but I want to check in with you tomorrow. It's not a rejection. It's just a boundary. It's just moving the line to where you're comfortable with it. And you know what? That friendship didn't fall apart. Finally, the pattern did. Thank goodness. Now, this next one, it's not marketed as a boundary book. This is something that I've learned is a lot of things book. It's called The Dance of Anger by Harriet Lerner. And it's not marketed as a specific one kind of book, but I will tell you this, every therapist worth their salt will tell you it absolutely can help you with boundaries. Lerner writes about something that most people don't think about or realize, and that is that anger is often the signal that a boundary has been crossed. And sometimes you don't know what that boundary is. It's a thing that happens in the moment. Now, I'm not talking about rage. I'm talking about anger. That little quiet kind of anger. The I don't like this, but I don't know what else to do kind of anger. She describes relationships like a dance. When one person changes their steps, even for the better, the other person will often resist, not because they're bad, but because change feels threatening in those dance steps. I lived this when I started saying, I can't come over tonight, or I'm not discussing that topic anymore. People who relied on the old version of me, the overgiving, self-sacrificing version, tried to tug me back into the old choreography. I even got told, "You've really changed." And I thought, thank you, that was the point. Harriet Lerner taught me something no one else phrased quite like this. Change is contagious, but so is resistance. If someone bristles at your boundary, it doesn't mean the boundary is wrong. It means that the relationship is adjusting to a healthier rhythm, and that takes time. So, if Cloud and Townsend teach you the blueprint, if Tawwab gives you the tools to build, and Lerner teaches you that emotional dance, then the real lesson that they all point to is boundaries are not rules for other people. They are guidelines for yourself, and your peace is the protected land inside that fence. Boundaries don't keep love out. They keep resentment out. They keep exhaustion out. They keep the old you, the one who said yes with a shaking voice, from dragging you back into a life that you outgrew. So if you pick up one of these books, let it be a companion, not a textbook, not a homework. A voice on the porch beside you reminding you you're allowed to have limits. You're allowed to rest. You're allowed to protect your peace. You're allowed to belong to yourself. And that's the heart of every good boundary ever laid down. Okay, my beautiful beans, before I wrap up and get into my final thoughts, I just wanted to tell y'all something that my Aunt Faye once said. And if you've ever met or had a Southern auntie, you already know that theology runs deep, y'all. Well, I was spiraling one day. I was doing that thing where your brain takes one little worry and builds a 3-story house with a pool and a 2-car garage out of it. And I told her, "Faye, I feel like my life is being held together with duct tape and whatever's left of my good intentions." She didn't even blink. She just looked at me over her glass and said, "Baby, duct tape holds better than pride. Wrap it twice and keep going." And I still laugh about that because she wasn't wrong. Sometimes we think we need to have everything polished, optimized, color-coded, psychologically approved before we're allowed to live our lives like real adults. Reality is, though, half of us are out here doing our best with the emotional equivalent of a hardware store starter kit, absolutely no set of instructions, and the grace of God. So, if you're listening right now and you're feeling like you're behind or you just should have figured it all out by now, let me give you some Aunt Faye style certified truth. You don't need to be flawless to be growing. You just have to be honest and consistent and willing to try again tomorrow. Your fence does not have to be fancy. The gate don't have to be new. It just has to swing open. All right, let's keep going. Y'all think about Aunt Faye. There is something that I'd be remiss not to talk about today. Something many of us tiptoe around like it's a live wire on the kitchen floor. It would be like ignoring the pachyderm on the playground if I didn't put a spotlight on the tension and uncertainty floating around in our country right now. Honey, I don't care which side of the fence you're standing on. Everybody looks over that fence and the grass looks a lot meaner on the other side these days. It's sharp, dry, and ready to bite your ankles. That's why digital boundaries matter just as much as emotional ones. Boundaries for what you consume, boundaries for how often you consume it, and boundaries for what you believe on first sight. Because not everything loud is true, and not everything true is loud. Let me tell you about Miss Arlene. If you've listened to me, you may have heard her name floating around my stories. She's this tiny, wiry little thing from up the road. She lives alone now that her husband has passed. She loves Jesus and cross-stitch, her chickens, and any casserole recipe that starts with a stick of butter. A few years back, her grandson, Caleb, who's a delightful young man, I adore him, gave her his old laptop. Now, he sat her down with patience and love, and he taught her how to email and how to look up weather and how to search for funny videos. This immediately became her new spiritual practice. And she took to that laptop the way ducks take to June rain. She can do anything on it now. But the next thing we know, she's on every Facebook gardening group within 100 miles. And she's talking about heirloom tomatoes like she's testifying in church. But the more comfortable she got online, she started wandering into rougher territory, kind of far afield. And the land of headlines written out there to make your pulse spike, and videos meant to scare first and inform later if they inform at all. Posts that are shared by someone who shared it from someone who never checked if it was even real. These kind of posts, you know the kind, they're out there and they're overrunning the place. So one morning she called me sounding like she'd just seen the 4 horsemen trotting up the main street. And she whispered, "Mira, the world is ending today at 3 o'clock. And I took a minute, because Miss Arlene, she's got sense. But I just said, "Well, sugar, let me go make some tea. We'll just space this old apocalypse down together." When I got over there, it turns out she had stumbled onto a piece of content so dramatic that it would have made Walter Cronkite spit out his pipe. And that's kind of the point I'm making here. Most of the folks here in my audience, a lot of y'all listening, grew up in a time where if Walter Cronkite said it, it was true. If Tom Brokaw delivered it, it was vetted. There were standards, checks, a whole long chain of accountability. But now, anyone with a phone and a pulse can publish something that sounds like news. And to people like Miss Arlene, who came up in that Cronkite era, that tone of authority can feel just like the real thing. Her nervous system read, "Danger." But the story wasn't even accurate. It was ridiculous, but delivered in such a way that it had weight. And that is where these digital boundaries need to come in for every single one of us. Digital boundaries are the fences that we build around our attention, because our attention is the most valuable resource we have and the least protected. Your nervous system was never designed to carry the full weight of the world before breakfast. We weren't meant to take in 1,000 crises a day and keep functioning like nothing was happening. We are not wired for the emotional treadmill that modern media puts on us. Friends, if we don't build intentional limits, someone else will build them for us. Usually, it's an algorithm whose only job is to rile us up enough to keep us scrolling, because that is the research now. That is what we know those algorithms are made to do. The more inflammatory, the more you look at it. So they're literally programming to rile us up. Now, I want you to know what I told Miss Arlene after she calmed down. I said, "Baby, let's get you some trustworthy sources." And that's what I recommend for y'all too. Not dozens, just a handful. A small, well-tended garden of information. One of my favorites is Ground News, and I'll just go ahead and say it here. They're not sponsoring me. They don't even know I'm talking about them right now. But Ground News shows you how different outlets across the spectrum cover the same story. Who's leaning where, who's balanced, and who's sensationalizing. It's like putting on glasses after years of blurry vision. Another good source is always Reuters, which still writes like they're trying to win the most boring but accurate award, and trust me, that's the kind of boring we need sometimes. There's also the Associated Press, the AP, steady as ever. And for folks who want more fact checking built into their diet, all sides can be a grounding tool too. These aren't meant to tell you what to think now. They're there to help you separate information from irritation. Anyway, back to Miss Arlene. She's really the most interesting thing in this story. After we went through a few examples, something in her relaxed and her shoulders dropped. She said, I didn't realize the internet was hollering and hooting at me all the time. And doesn't that just hit home? Most of us don't realize when our nervous system is tightening up until it starts to let go. We don't realize when we've shifted into hypervigilance or fear. We just feel tense or irritable, tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. That's the cost of unfiltered digital consumption. So here's how digital boundaries work. You set limits on where you get your news. You pick 2 or 3 reliable places, not 10, not 50, quality over quantity. Then you're going to set limits on when you consume news. Maybe you check once in the morning and once in the evening. Not all day, not every 15 minutes because an app dinged. You're going to set limits on how much negative content you'll take in. Your brain can only hold so much fear before it starts overflowing into your relationships, your sleep, and your sense of hope. So you're going to make sure if there's some negativity, some negative stories out there, some bad things going on, you're going to limit how much you take in a day. And 4, we're going to set boundaries within yourself without reacting. You're going to pause and breathe. You're going to research before you share something, respond to something, or spiral off of something. You're going to go to a trusted place and double check. Because the truth is, most of what's thrown at us isn't information, it's stimulation. And stimulation without discernment is how fear takes root. You know, sometimes I think about Miss Arlene clicking around on that old laptop, her glasses slipping down her nose, her whole heart just wide open to whatever comes at her. And then I think about how many of us, even the sharpest ones, are doing the same thing emotionally. So I'm going to leave you with this. You're responsible for the gatekeeper inside your mind. You get to choose what enters your yard. Not every headline deserves your adrenaline. Not every story earns the right to shape your day. Not everything loud deserves your trust. And not every pachyderm on the playground needs your full attention. Digital boundaries don't make you uninformed. They make you sane. They help you stay human in a world that's constantly asking you to panic. So go slow. Be discerning. Let your garden grow in peace. And if Miss Arlene can become a firebrand of online wisdom, anybody can.
You've been listening to Human Beings Radio, a little garden for the mind, body, and spirit. If something from today's episode found a place to grow in you, share it with someone who might need a little bit of light. You can find show notes, upcoming topics, and ways to support the project at humanbeansradio.com. And if you'd like to help keep this garden blooming, visit buymeacoffee.com/humanbeansradio. Follow along on your favorite platform, leave a kind review if you can, find us on all the socials, and come back next time. We'll keep tending together. Until then, stay rooted, seek light, and remember, even after the hardest rain, the garden always finds its way back to green. Writing graphics and all the technical stuff was me, Mira Crowe, and the original music was my kid, John Henry. And before we close, a quick note. I'm not a therapist, doctor, or licensed counselor, just a fellow traveler sharing stories, research, and reflections that have helped me along the way. Nothing here is meant to replace professional, medical, or mental health advice. If you're struggling, please reach out to someone qualified. a doctor, therapist, or counselor who can walk that road with you. You don't have to do any of this alone. Help really is out there, and you deserve it.